Stay tuned because I'm sure you're dying to know the answer.
The single most common question I get asked is, are you a boy or are you a girl?
Well, let's cast aside the fact that that's probably a lie. For the majority of people, you can simply look at a person and determine what they are. Now, if you are someone that has an unconventional look where it could go one way or the other, surely people will be curious in some instances, and you can't really complain because you are the one that determines your fashion choices. You can't live in a way that goes against the grain of what is ordinary and then be surprised when people have questions.
The simple answer is no. But then the response after that is usually a very confused, what?
Yes, that's usually the response one gets when they deny the basic fundamentals of reality.
So here is the explanation.
How smug you are for someone who's about to drop one of the most harebrained explanations I've ever heard. But by all means, proceed.
I am non-binary, and that means I identify as something other than male or female.
Here we go with this non-binary stuff. Now, first, let's put an end to this non-binary business. You see, if gender is binary, then you cannot live outside of that binary. A binary is a concept which denotes something made up of two parts. So if gender is binary, then there are only two genders. If your argument is that gender isn't binary, then everyone is non-binary by definition because gender isn't a binary concept, thus rendering the description of your identity as useless because there is no binary to begin with. You'll notice that people that describe themselves in this way usually say, well, I identify as, and I am something other than male or female, yet they can never qualify what exactly that means, because anyone with a functioning brain realizes this is because male and female, with the exception of some birth defects, are the only categories that exist if you're a human being. This is the part where they'll jump in and state that gender is completely independent of sex, but we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly.
Our society and history has led us to believe over thousands of years that there are only people who are male and people who are female.
Okay, that's not society and history's fault. That is reality's fault, and if you have a problem with that, I don't know what to tell you.
But that is because past society has based gender on physical sex.
No, that's because gender is an aggregate of both physical sex and cultural norms. The concept of gender was defined by the differences between the sexes. Men and women in ancient societies were good at different things, and one might argue that despite the fact that society has progressed to a point where men and women can take on any role, that's still true. So their roles were determined by their use in society. People didn't just make up differing roles for men and women on a whim, they had grounds in the natural order of life.
Let me see what it is, nurse. Ah, yes, what a strapping young lad.
Okay, the best part of this skit is that you think this stands on its own as a joke. Doctors aren't wrong for determining what a child is by looking at their genitals, as it is one of the key factors that determines their sex.
It's outdated. The truth is that gender is in the brain, and physical sex is a completely separate and different thing that is private to every individual.
Told you we'd get back to that completely separate argument. The funny thing about that line of reasoning is that if gender is completely independent of sex, which, by the way, it isn't, trans people wouldn't need hormones and surgery to be the gender they feel that they are. It's almost like the body and brain are linked to each other and physical and mental aspects combine to create what constitutes a man or woman. You can't have it both ways. You're not describing gender at this point. You're just describing some vague feeling that cannot be defined and trying to pass it off as some sort of special identity that requires recognition, when in reality you're just an individual with your own personality and fashion choices.
What people really mean when they're asking the boy or girl question is creepily, so, what genitals do you have?
No, it isn't. That's just the only way you can interpret it, because you have deliberately chosen to ignore the undeniable link between gender and sex.
People need to realize it doesn't matter what living meat skeleton you've been born in, it's what you feel that defines you.
What you feel is what defines you as an individual, not what sex and gender you are, because that's something you are born as.
Non-binary is a blanket term for anyone who identifies out with the binary gender. There are endless ways of being non-binary, and no two people identify in the same way.
Since I've already thoroughly destroyed the binary/non-binary argument, let's focus on another angle. If no two people identify in the same way, then gender identity is a superfluous term for individuality, because men and women aren't just a blanket identity either. There are many differing personality types for men and women, and while people share similar traits, they're still individuals with their own unique identity that has nothing to do with gender and sex. You've diluted the term gender to be so vague that it can no longer be defined in any meaningful way. You've created a problem you cannot reconcile. If gender is separate from sex, you've invalidated trans people. If gender is connected, then where are all the sets of genitals for these other identities you claim are so real and valid? That's right. They don't exist because they're a figment of your imagination.
So just remember, gender is what you feel, not what your parts are. Don't be afraid to be yourself.
Refusing to acknowledge reality for what it is doesn't make you more enlightened than anyone else. If gender is simply what you feel, there's nowhere to draw the line, and people can start identifying as plants and animals, and you can't tell them no because you've decided that it's just an individual's subjective reality. The only part I can agree with in this entire video is don't be afraid to be yourself, which has nothing to do with gender or sex, and everything to do with growing as a person and staying true to your values regardless of how people treat you. This does not mean you actively deny reality, rather that you accept it and find a way to live within it that allows you to thrive. Thanks for watching.
I'm the only one.